My name is Nancy Alice McHugh. I want to welcome you. We're very excited that you're here, grateful, because we know you have plenty of options on a beautiful Sunday morning. Come in from the world of Supreme Court decisions and January 6th Commission and all that awful stuff, and focus with us on something you can do something about. I'm going to explain to you the map that you got. This is a map of the inland port, and for the people who are online, they are watching a video called Self-Guided Tour. You were seeing it without sound, but on the back of your map is the URL where you can listen to it. It's only 9 minutes, but most people have never been there. And as a geographer by training, I really believe getting out and seeing it makes a big difference. I want to thank our volunteers. We have a lot of people who have helped us. I'm sorry Dorothy hasn't come in yet. I'll mention her at the end. 2 people, Shauna South and Carolyn Erickson, have been my right arm, my left arm, and my vertebrae. I mean, they have been with me from the beginning, back when we were, as members of the Coalition to Stop the Polluting Port, got the idea to do the tour. And then we turned to the Unitarian Church, of which Carolyn and I are members, and we recruited Jean Mahalko, who's in charge of coffee as well, Di Johnson and CJ Sadiq, who are in the vestibule, Robert Lindsley, who's wonderful. He's gone out with me on several presentations. And Phil Davis, is Phil here yet? I know he's coming. He did the video, fabulous video. Darlene Thane, who couldn't be here, and Ken Krause. There's Dorothy. Dorothy is a major leader on the Westside, and she has been supportive of our effort to get the word out about the port and the tour right from the very beginning. We're very grateful. We also have online lots of folks, including Kathleen Cahill. She got so discouraged about Utah and the inland port effort that she and her husband moved to Arizona. But she's with us in spirit. And our technology guru up there, Tristan Moore, who has just been an angel. He's a young guy, and he puts up with us old technophobes with such grace and calm. We're really grateful. Let me tell you what we're going to do today. We're going to have a brief introduction, and it's going to be an amazing thing. David has put together, in 5 minutes, slides that will explain to you the inland port. He's done a fabulous job. Then we will have a dialogue with Robert Gehrke moderating and the panel talking and answering questions amongst themselves. Then we will open it for Q&A, both here in the sanctuary and online. We will then break by 11:30 and invite you to come out onto the patio, continue the conversation. You can remove your masks. Enjoy coffee, which is honestly the best coffee in the city. I'm not kidding. And homemade cookies. The other thing I want to acknowledge is that this summer forum program, there were handouts of it there, and there are handouts in the Elliott Hall, but also it's online. We're doing this every Sunday. Is a program that we need to support. It is not self-supporting, and it's a bit at risk. So we have a donation basket in the back, and we have a donation basket in Elliott Hall. We'd appreciate your support to encourage this program to continue. The restrooms are through that door and past the glass doors. Now, let me introduce the panel. I think everybody in this room knows Robert Gehrke. He's a highly respected columnist with the Tribune, but I'll bet you wouldn't recognize him at Trader Joe's. Right? You'd never know him from that picture in the paper. He has taken on the courageous role of moderating this. David Scheer is an architect, planner with his own company based here in Salt Lake. He has been part of the coalition to stop the polluting port from the beginning. He is also part of a power couple. His wife is on the planning commission and former dean of architecture at the university. And he is chair of the Capitol Hill Neighborhood Council, a community council for Capitol Hill, and just won a $600,000 grant from the city. Victoria Petro-Eschler is a city councilwoman from the Westside, District 1. She is an ex officio member of the Utah Inland Port Authority Board. Had to fight very hard just to get her at the table, even though it's without a vote. She has been so diligent. She has talked to everybody. She has gotten herself up the learning curve. She's very highly respected. She is also a city council person and has just lost a couple of months of her life to the budget process. Awful. She has also just signed on with an organization called Pathways Associates. She's a consultant. This is a company that works, provides consulting services to governments and nonprofits. And I would be remiss not mentioning her fourth job. She is the mother of 3 small children at home. She shows up without mascara on her nose. Her earrings match. She's always smiling. I just think it's a miracle. And Elizabeth Waite, many of you know, she is a member of this church. She is a representative in the Utah legislature. She had a career of 30 plus years teaching junior and senior high school. Is that courageous or what? Courageous. Interestingly, she's also on a task force to choose the new state flag, which gets her into some interesting conversations. So one other thing, Robert, yes. I know it is part of your professional toolkit to get people to talk and talk and talk. But somewhere you've got to find the ability to interrupt these people because they are very well educated, very articulate, and they're going to need to be interrupted. And if all else fails, blame it on Alice.
She's not wrong.
Can you do that? We're on.
All right, we're going to move fast, as she mentioned. We've got a lot of ground to cover. We could probably spend all afternoon talking about this issue. So, as she mentioned, I think when we were discussing this before, we decided the best place to start is sort of an overview, the 30,000, maybe 90,000 foot overview of what the inland port is, how we got to where we are. And so David took the dubious task of having to try to walk us through all of that. And you've got 4.5 minutes now. So David, why don't you take us through the origins of the inland port?
Okay, thank you, Robert. Can we have my first slide? Here we go. What is an inland port? An inland port is essentially an intermodal hub where goods are transferred between trucks and trains. They're ports because they also offer customs services that allow a shipment to undergo inspection here rather than at the coastal port. Inland ports exist in several U.S. cities. Next slide, please. The Utah Inland Port was created by the state legislature in 2018. It governs 25 square miles, shown here in blue. Almost all of this area is within Salt Lake City and covers nearly 1/5 of the city's total area. Salt Lake City's boundary is in green in the upper image up there. The inland port is controlled by the Utah Inland Port Authority, sometimes referred to as UIPA. UIPA is governed by a 5-member board of trustees. All are appointed by state officials, none are elected. Next slide, please. The area north of I-80 is mostly undeveloped natural area. It lacks infrastructure, roads, water, power, and sewer. The soil is also very poor for building, require special expensive foundations, as the enormous cost overruns at the state prisons demonstrate. Almost all the land within UIPA jurisdiction is privately owned. In its original undeveloped state, this property is worth very little in terms of money. Next slide, please. Ideas for development of the Northwest Quadrant have been discussed among local leaders since the 1970s. The current plan has its roots in the city's Northwest Quadrant Master Plan. Under development since 2013, it was adopted by the City Council in 2016. As this illustration from the master plan shows, good, that's the right one, okay. The plan calls for dividing the area north of I-80 into a development area in blue and a natural area in green. When this was formalized in 2017, the City Council created the Northwest Quadrant Overlay District. Whereas the zoning in most of this area had been agricultural, this overlay changed it to light industrial in the development area, setting the stage for the development of warehouses, which we see taking place now. In 2015, the state selected the site shown in orange for the new state prison. The infrastructure for the prison was upsized to accommodate new development. This, along with the upzoning, transformed formerly undevelopable land into prime real estate. Next slide, please. In 2018, the city entered into agreements with the two largest property owners in the port area north of I-80. These are the Colmena Group, doing business as NWQ Inc., and Kennecott Utah Copper. In these agreements, the city agreed to freeze its zoning ordinances affecting these properties as of January 1st, 2018, and to reimburse the owners for any infrastructure that they build there. This is to be paid from the property tax on any improvements on these properties. Next slide, please. In the waning hours of its 2018 session, the state legislature created the Utah Inland Port Authority with the boundaries you see here in blue. In creating the port, the legislature gave UIPA most of the property tax on improvements within the port. The tax on this added value was called a property tax increment. This revenue was taken away from local taxing authorities, including cities, school districts, and libraries. The legislature also took away the ability of local governments to control land use. All zoning authorities within the port were required to modify their ordinances to allow all port uses by December 2018, and then these ordinances were frozen. No further changes to them is allowed. Next slide, please. UIPA exists to promote development within its jurisdictional area. The main tool it uses is financial subsidies it gives to private landowners. Next slide, please. UIPA receives money from the state legislature directly, which is about $40 million in 2022. However, most of its funding will come from the tax increment. UIPA has used this revenue to issue bonds. In 2021, it sold $150 million in bonds backed by revenue from future property tax increment. UIPA has not made public how these funds are to be used. Next slide, please. There is no plan for the port. No one knows what it will contain. There is no plan for roads or other infrastructure, and without such a plan, costs cannot be estimated. Without a plan, each parcel is being developed separately. This piecemeal development prevents city agencies from planning their services efficiently, increasing their cost. It also prevents authorities, such as Salt Lake City Public Utilities and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, from assessing the overall impact of the development and regulating it appropriately. A plan would provide guidelines for site development and building design to mitigate harmful effects of development. There are no such guidelines at the port. Last slide, please. Importantly, creating a plan would involve numerous studies of the port's potential impacts. By its very nature, the port will affect traffic and air quality, natural habitat, water consumption, and runoff water entering the wetlands around the Great Salt Lake. The disproportionate impact on nearby communities is clear from established weather and traffic patterns. The business model on which the port is based has never been rigorously studied, and there are good reasons to question its viability. The planning process would study all of these impacts and more.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah,
Masterfully done, sir.
it's a lot to get through. You did a great job. Can we leave that last slide up, if you don't mind? Because I think that kind of does give us an overview of some of the issues that we wanted to discuss here today. Victoria, you are, oh, we get Bob Ross. We can leave this up too, though. That's great. Happy little clouds.
The best.
So Victoria, as Alice mentioned in your introduction, you're the city's representative on the port board now. Can you kind of give us a little snapshot of the reality of the current situation? Davis walked us through the history of it. What's the current situation, and what do you think are the most pressing issues? And then we'll delve down and let you guys kind of interact a little bit on what those pressing issues are.
So this board is a reallocation. There were previously 11 people on the board, which included a few appointments, but also predominantly representatives from the municipalities that were impacted, including 2 from Salt Lake City, Magna, West Valley. All of that has been done away with, and in all honesty, I was terrified and spent an undue amount of time during the legislative session cooking as a way to get the attention of these lawmakers who wouldn't otherwise pay attention. I would literally deliver food to them and say, hey, can we talk? And it's a really effective strategy. But as it stands now, there are 5 people who have votes. Appointed by the legislature is Representative Mike Schultz from the House side, Senator Jerry Stevenson from the Senate side, and the joint appointment from them is Miles Hansen, who is our board chair and the president and CEO of the World Trade Center. The governor gets 2 appointees. They cannot be elected officials, and that's Dan Hemmert from formerly Go Ed, now Go Utah, and Abby Osborne, who is the Speaker of the House.
She's the chief of staff for the House of Representatives.
Thank you. Okay, I just met her the other day, so I'm not as well versed with her. And then I had to push hard and beg and plead and work to make sure that we had a place at the table. And so I'm there as an ex officio without any vote. The status of what the work is right now, I was actually terrified about this, but I actually think this operates in our best interest. We have unlikely allies emerging. This board has come in and looked at the organizational integrity and really gone deep. The first thing Senator Stevenson requested that Representative Schultz seconded is a legislative audit of all the functionality to look at everything from financials to just organizational operations. There has been a realignment of personnel such that the former executive director has been pushed over to a president role, which will report as a contractor, but the new executive director position is open, and I have the chance to influence potentially who will be hiring. As a silver lining for not having a vote, I don't count towards quorum, so I can be in every meeting ever and listen to everything. It's the bright side of things. We are looking at other things. For instance, there's a $12 million appropriation for rail that was used to build roads. I'm going to catch a misdemeanor today because I've been in so many closed sessions about this, so be gentle with me. So we're looking at everything from that. From the city perspective, the other thing that HB 443 did, the bill that realigned everything, was by December 31st, 2022, the Inland Port Authority and the city must have reached a contract for the operation and the interaction around this port. Otherwise, both sides have to forfeit their access to the tax increment. And as you know, no one is willing to ever leave a dollar on the table. It's a high motivator. So we are working. I have my notes from the city lawyer here to make sure I represent it appropriately. But we're working. And for those of you who have been engaged, you'll remember about 18, 20 months ago, there was a letter written from the city to the Port Authority kind of going, hey, we're concerned about X, Y, and Z. We're concerned about the infrastructure. We're concerned about environmental impacts. We're concerned about the quality of jobs you're intending to bring here. And it got zero response at that time. The reason was that the tone was off-putting and the litigation that's pending in front of the Supreme Court of the state was causing them to be nervous to talk. That letter has since become the basis upon which this contract is being drafted. They gave the city attorney the right at first draft, which for those of you who are in the legal field, you know that's a strong point, a strong place to begin. So I probably am the only person in the room who isn't feeling completely fatalistic about this project, because I do think that we are trending in a positive, protective direction overall.
Okay. When we were discussing this before, we touched on some of these issues that are on the slide. Representative Waite, do you want to take the lead on our sort of a discussion of the environmental issues that you see arising out of this port? Representative Waite, as was mentioned, is with the new redistricting, she represents most of the port now in the Utah House, and so is getting up to speed on these issues as well. So you want to take us through some of your concerns or issues that you see arising out of the environmental component of this?
Thank you. So, yes, I do have, in my new district, there is about half, probably a little bit more, of the inland port area. I live directly south of the inland port area, and that's where I taught. In my district, 34% of the residents are under the age of 19. So that's a lot of human development that I've been conscious will be impacted by everything that happens in the inland port, particularly regarding environment, but even regarding jobs and home stability with the quality of the jobs. So I'm also a union leader, and so I hang around with a lot of people who have been really excited about the potential for not just jobs, but green jobs, and that's been an emphasis. So the Utah AFL-CIO and many of the leaders have been watching and interested in the answers to questions about what kinds of jobs, what kinds of education will be supplied by employers, what opportunities for advancement, what will be the incomes for those jobs, will they be sustainable jobs, just exactly what. Meanwhile, I've been seeing nothing but traditional warehouse development. So where I used to come to church along 201 and see open fields on both sides, every square foot of area that wasn't developed before is now a gigantic warehouse. And no, they are not green trucks, and there are no facilities and provisions for green trucks, charging stations. There's nothing that makes that warehouse development appear any different from any warehouse development anywhere. And we've also had increased lanes in 201 and now the Mountain View Corridor. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Mountain View Corridor area, it's about a half block west of 5600 West. So 5600 West is 4 lanes of traffic with a turn lane and some development in that area. But Mountain View Corridor added 4 more lanes within a block of 5600 West, and now we are getting all of the commuters to Salt Lake from Harriman going through West Valley City right in that neighborhood, and then of course all of the new lanes on 201 to accommodate that. I've watched that out of concern, because when the Mountain View Corridor went through, and I wondered what the connection with the inland port was, the Mountain View Corridor went through neighborhoods near 5 schools in West Valley City, including right between Hunter High and Hillside Elementary, took out play fields, soccer field, parking lot, so the kiddos are right next to Mountain View Corridor, and those increased emissions. So the emissions has been something that I've been really concerned about as we've watched the development of the inland port warehouses and wondered about what will develop. I do, however, agree with Victoria in that everything that I've learned from my city government, as well as Salt Lake, is that there was no earlier oversight of all of that development. The land is privately owned. It would have developed as it could to profit the owners of the land. So I do agree with the idea of oversight and planning, but that's where we are right now.
Okay, thanks. And we'll go to David. I believe, David, correct me if I'm wrong, the legislature, I think 3 years ago, passed a bill to get a baseline for air quality monitoring around the port, to install some air quality monitors, and that's a project that's ongoing. But this air quality issue is one that's sort of front and center. Can you talk a little bit about the air quality issue, the environmental issues from your perspective, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the business model stuff?
Sure. We all know that our air quality in this valley is on a knife edge between being marginally breathable and being unbreathable. So any project that stands to add significant additional emissions needs to be studied very carefully. I used a standard planning method back when the amount of development was announced in the port's business plan, which was in May of 2020. Announcing that they foresaw 152 million additional square feet of warehouse being built before the port is completed. Using a standard planning method and manuals, I determined that this would generate 69,000 additional truck trips in our valley every day and 152,000 additional car trips every day. With this existing technology that drives our vehicles, that would be an overwhelming addition to emissions in this valley. There is the increasing reality of electric vehicles, but the U.S. Department of Transportation has estimated that by 2050, only half of the vehicles on our road will be electrically powered. And I think the number for commercial vehicles like long-range trucks is even lower. So unless something is done by way of very powerful government intervention, the changeover in the fleet from diesel and gasoline-powered vehicles to electrically powered vehicles will take place rather slowly, and in the meantime, we will be seeing a drastic increase in the number of trucks and cars accessing the port.
Yeah, and of course, all of that additional pollution causes additional health impacts to the communities, directly to the communities around there, and also the valleys more generally. Victoria, do you want to address the environmental issue, or should we move to the business model?
The what
The
issue?
environmental issues that are arising out of this, or do you want to move to the business model discussion?
I think they've done a
We
very good
think you've
job,
covered
but I
it?
do share their concerns.
Okay, well let's talk a little bit about the business model. As you mentioned, there have been some changes to it in this past session, with the city getting more of the tax increment now than they were before. Contracting with the Port Authority contracts with the city for services, but it's evolving, right? So maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think for most of us, this was one of the big pillars for the litigation, the lawsuit from the city against UEPA, was that it essentially was taxation without representation, when we weren't allowed to have self-determining votes in what happens on that territory, but you're taking the tax increment, and then we're still going to have to provide fire when there's a chemical fire or whatever out there. The returning of the increment has been a sign of good faith from the state to us, that they intend to be more cooperative. But for those of you who are war weary, who have been here from the beginning, it doesn't feel like the gesture grand enough to bring everyone to the table or to be at peace. So this contract, hopefully, is designed. It's not signed yet, and until it's signed, I will say things like allegedly, hopefully, and hedge my bets. But it's formalizing what we're going to be able to do with that. So we are remitting a portion of it back to UEPA. With that portion, we're going to be able to say, hey, this much money has to be spent. 40% is going to be spent on environmental mitigation, 40% on community impacts, which aligns around things like infrastructure, or they're even talking about enhancing eventually after school programming for families who would be working there, the community impacts like that. And then the final 20% is for economic development, trying to make sure that the workforce is ready, trying to make sure that as we build things, we're incentivizing the right kinds of companies to come. So we have that sort of control as well, which is making us feel confident. But the larger problem is that the port was conceived in such, I don't want to say chaos, in such distrust, and then it perpetuated a system of distrust, not inviting stakeholders in to understand that it's hard to trust that any business model that's been created. As we said, the business plan that's there is not sufficient. And this is one of those places where when I heard that we're going from 11 that includes a lot of representatives down to 5 that includes a lot of business people, I was like, oh, this is gonna be bad. It's actually, you all, we have really great allies. They are analyzing everything. And increasingly, they are understanding that the CFO's office is not where corporate decisions are being made. When companies are deciding if they're going to relocate here, if they're going to do business here, I'm going to say these letters in the wrong order, and someone in this room is going to know that I am learning this as I go. It's called ESGs. They're considering environmental, social, and governance factors in where they go. So if their kids who have asthma of their employees can't breathe, it's going to knock us out. If their kids who are transgender are going to feel like they're being targeted on baseball teams, we're gonna be dinged, we're not gonna be considered. And then governance. If there's huge turmoil between the city and the state and the Port Authority, that's gonna create too much uncertainty within a business model for a corporation to move here. So all of these things are coalescing into, there is a high call, and I don't believe there'll be much more movement from this board until we have not just a solid business model and business plan, but also a master plan to go along with it, to tell us what comes next and how, and give us some predictability. But then we also have that other side where we're living in a world where increasingly these non-quantifiable or non-monetizable factors are weighing heavily in the decisions of where corporations are doing business. And the goal now is to harness those two things into protection for the city and its constituents. Well, okay. And not just, sorry, I ran for city council. We want to protect West Valley too. We want everyone protected.
Well, and that's actually part of one of the big issues for me, is that this has always been a focus on Salt Lake City, because that's the boundaries where the port has been. But West Valley City is literally downwind from everything that happens from that port, because the prominent air pattern is to blow across the lake, across the inland port area, right across West Valley City. And West Valley City has had a member on the board in the previous version. That member was not active in addressing any of these issues. And even though I think she was the chair of that board, conducted the meetings and literally said hardly, if anything, at those meetings to represent particularly the health interests and traffic issues for West Valley City. So one of my thoughts and my observations all along has been, wait a minute, yeah, we've got tax issues and land use issues in Salt Lake City boundaries, but West Valley City is the population and the west side of Salt Lake City, but the West Valley City population is going to be one of the most immediate and strongest impact areas.
David, you touched on this in your introduction. There's not really anything you can point to and say, this is what we want the inland port to look like. Can you talk a little bit about that, both from the business model perspective, and let's touch on the transparency issues as well that arise from the way this board is being operated?
Sure. As I sort of emphasized in my introductory remarks, there is no plan, and there never has been. And although the Inland Port Authority has been not exactly welcoming to public input, the conversation has been shifted away from a pure what's best for, what's good for General Blumels is good for the USA attitude, to being at least for public relations purposes interested in environmental questions. The business plan itself, even in the published version from 2020, isn't a business plan, as Victoria alluded to. It's really a statement of aspirations, has no data behind it. And there are serious questions that I've been recently learning about the viability of the notion of an inland port. Somebody I spoke to recently said, well, look at the Clearfield, free trade zone. Why has that declined? The idea being that, well, when most of foreign trade in the United States came from the East, from Europe, it made sense to have a secondary distribution center in Utah. Now that it mostly comes from the West Coast, we're really too close to the West Coast for it to work. Now, I'm no expert on this thing, I'll be the first to admit, but people who do know about this are raising these questions, and I think that it's very important that we study these things. The expertise is out there, and it has not been brought to bear on this proposal any more than the environmental expertise that's out there has been brought to bear. So, bottom line is, we don't know anything about the impacts of the port in terms of environment, in terms of its impact on the nearby communities, in terms of its impact on the economy of the state, and yet we have thrown, we being collectively the state expressed by its legislature, we've thrown hundreds of millions of dollars at this. If you were a private business, you wouldn't have gotten a dime based on the information that's been provided to this city.
And right, to follow up on that, you mentioned the $150 million in bonds that have been issued, $40 million a year in state money, the TIF, the tax, the increment that they're collecting, and it's kind of hard to get a grip on where this is actually being spent, right? If you read the Tribune, and I encourage everyone to read the Tribune, you saw recently about the rail line fiasco where they were paying, or the story about how they were paying money for land that is still not being developed. And so, it's these issues that are arising, financial issues that are arising as well. Victoria, do you want to touch on that, or should we move on to, if you want to touch on that, and then you can talk a little bit about the promises of jobs, because I know that's something you're really interested in.
Yeah, so my background is nonprofit administration, and every time we've asked the port, where's your master plan, the response, or when you ask for the infrastructure study or the health human risk assessment or any of those things, the refrain is, we don't own land. We're not a land-owning port. We can't do that. Now, I come from nonprofit sector. I don't own anything, from the violins I give out to. So, but I have always known as a nonprofit professional where my organization was aiming to be in 3 years, in 5 years, and in 10 years. It's called a strategic plan. And I think we haven't, because of the controversy surrounding it, because of needing some different personnel skill sets, because of all of these factors, because there wasn't an awesome idea of what this port was going to be, it has never crystallized this kind of, we have to have a plan. Salt Lake City is awesome at putting, whatever letter you want on the zoning map. We don't need them to do that. That is our job. What we need them to do is say, in 3 years, if this port, for what we are expecting to see, comes to pass, here are the things you ought to see from us. Here are the projected expenses for it. Here's the projected revenue stream that will take care of it. And they need to be linking us all to, these are other examples, because did you know we have something called common carrier law? Like, I'm learning things that, as a music therapy student in 1998, I never thought I would learn. But it's so nuanced and it's so deep, and you really do have to become a subject matter expert in things. But what they should be doing is saying, in 3 years, here's what you should expect to see if this thing is on track. And here are all of these data points. And here's some information to educate yourself on it. And then in 5 years, here's what you should expect to see. 10 years. And I contend we should be going out to 50 years on these plans with a project this big. My kids and I live in a townhome community where I look across the road from Meadowlark. I see inland port territory. This is not abstract. My children will potentially be living here. I'm not halfway through my life, so I'm hoping I will still be here. And I think we should be doing 50-year plans on these things. We've never had that. That comes down to 2 issues that we brought up. Number one, the transparency. The feeling that when you're asking a question, you are viewed as just an uneducated pest that needs to be scooted away has violated so much of our ability to even get to a point where we can have a good faith conversation with them. But secondarily, we can't, like as David said, we have no margins here on the air quality. We have nothing that we can give. So when I am raising 3 children and every copay at the doctor's office is a stress for me because I am a working class woman who is separated from her husband and paying things out of her own pocket in a gentrifying neighborhood, we don't have margins financially, we don't have margins in terms of air, we don't have margins in terms of time and energy to learn all this stuff, and that is all compounding into a tremendous amount of distrust. I can't live with pessimism or disillusionment for too long. I am a weep for today and joy comes in the morning kind of person, right? And so I gotta like be stressed out, and then the next day I get up and I do the work. I'm optimistic that this new board, Miles Hansen as our board chair, has changed things. Representative Schultz literally texts me and says, how will this impact your neighbors? Senator Stevenson is coming with me to talk to the families who live on 2200 West, who are continuing to live an agrarian lifestyle, but are increasingly finding themselves boxed in by warehouses because he's agrarian and understands them. Dan Hemmert looks at me and he goes, okay, Victoria, I'm trusting you that you know what, that you're gonna help me understand what the people want, because that's not my area of giftedness, right? We have, as I told you, we have a ball that we have to keep our eye on. This thing can go off the literal and metaphorical rails at any moment. But I think for the first time, we're having this, and that's what's gonna happen. The secondary part is workers' protections. So if this is going to be a place where Amazon can just put your kitsch on a new truck and send it to the next location, that's demoralizing. It's demoralizing to our environment. It's demoralizing to our workforce. Packing boxes is not anything that has social mobility for big corporations. However, what if I had the opportunity to meet with Senator Romney, and Senator Romney said, I don't think you all should have a port. And I looked at him and I was like, so the decision's been made for us. I'm not sure how he missed that. And so he goes, well, you know, Boston a few years ago made the decision that they were going to be a hub, and they had a unified plan. He goes, you need to decide who you want at this port. And it really was the simplest but like most profound moment for me. I was like, oh, what if we didn't let Amazon and Walmart take over our city? What if we didn't have nonsensical industry that doesn't scale, that isn't sustainable, that's going to kill us? What if we took a page out of other people's books? What if we decided, we already have the BioHive initiative here that is incentivizing research and development of biomedical technologies. What if we said that land out there, which as much as I want it to stay beautiful, I'm recruiting artists to come and capture that beauty that we'll never get back. We know that's not possible. That's not going to happen. It's going to be developed. So if we concede that point, what if we create a unified business plan and we say, you know what, Point of the Mountain research and developers, you research developers, BioHive, we're going to be the next step for you. We're where it comes to pass, manufacturing, and then we'll have a distribution hub from there, right? What if that's what the port is? That biomedical manufacturing is low emissions, high impact. We could capture sales tax on that, which would then make it so that I don't have to raise your property tax just to pay firefighters. And we could create the blue collar jobs that scale, that are sustainable. Those kids coming out of Slicksy who don't envision themselves in the white coats at MIT, but still enjoy that STEM sector, we could be creating jobs. And there's growing consensus and movement. That's how we're going to protect workers. I also was talking to them, every time we dig a ditch, we have to be doing apprenticeship utilization, and our union men and women have to be at the table helping us guide that discussion as well. But that's what I'm advocating for at this moment.
I've got several more questions I could ask, but I think we wanted to give the audience a chance to participate as well. So if you have questions, I'll grab the microphones and we'll bring them around.
Significant amount of money has already been spent. Has anyone followed the money? Where has it gone? That's the easiest thing to figure out whose interests are, what's going to happen.
So Senator Stevenson really shares your concern. I mean, everyone does on the newly appointed board. We have a legislative audit currently ongoing They said the earliest they could get to us was August to start. They're already started because Stevenson and Schultz do what needs to be done. I expect by early fall we will see a full, transparent, publicly available accounting of a lot of issues surrounding these sorts of things. And we have a board that has actually stopped certain contracts, rescinded votes from the previous board, so that we can take a moment, catch our breath, and say, is this actually, this board is highly cognizant of the fact that ad hoc development will be the thing that is most financially impractical and will ruin the environment and all those other things we need.
And this audit, I'm just going to jump in here because for us in the media, this is a big deal because we can't get straight answers either. I mean, Leah Larson's our reporter who's been covering this issue. She's top notch. But, she asks people, well, how much is this transloading facility going to cost? And she gets two wildly different answers. How much is it why are we spending money paying Boyer for land that is supposed to be developed, but it's not? So this audit's going to be a big deal, and I'm glad to see they're doing it.
Okay, my name's Pat. I just wonder, since you say all these warehouses are being built, how many are being financed by Jeff Bezos or his representatives? Because that's probably what's happening. If they've already been built and they're being built. It's Amazon.
I know we have lots of Amazon square footage out there already. I don't know of any other proposed at this moment. I know Walmart is also proposed out there. And that's why it feels like we're in an arms race on time, because while we have this Port Authority concept that we're wanting clarity on, these are all individually owned parcels of land by private owners who read the writing on the wall as property values go up, and they're getting tired of waiting for us to get our act together. And to me, that's the worst case scenario, is that we don't have a central governing authority with its stuff sorted out, and each of these people create truck-served facilities that don't create living wage jobs. That to me is a nightmare.
And will soon be automated.
Yeah.
It'll be robots.
Yeah, my name is Jim Catano. I'm a member of this congregation, and with some notable exceptions like Liz Waite here, I found that lobbying our legislature is the equivalent of beating one's head against the wall. And certain organizations seem to take their approach is to sue the blanksters, and SUA, for example, does that. And I'm wondering what the status is of the current city lawsuit against the state for basically usurping its sovereignty, and other possibility for other lawsuits to force them to be in compliance with Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, especially since we're already out of compliance. Why is there any development in this valley? Why?
Yeah. Who wants to address the lawsuit?
So as a criteria for HB 443, we agreed with state officials that we would both write letters to the Supreme Court requesting that, explicitly stating that we did not expect this contract to moot the decision. The decision is about more than just our port. It is about whether the state can usurp local land use authority for their own purposes. The precedent that would be set is tremendous. So both for our own purposes and for that, and because we don't have a vote, it's still taxation without representation. So that part is moving forward. Do you want to speak to the other parts?
I sit on a legislative appropriations committee called Business, Economic Development, and Labor. So a couple of times UEPA has come before us to present, but those presentations have been short or canceled. And so it's left me wondering, where is the accountability if it isn't to that appropriations committee? And just so you know, Utah has a really extraordinary budget system in which every single legislator is part of an appropriations committee. That's the one where I sit, but that means that every legislator has part of that input and from constituents and to the Executive Appropriations Committee as part of our budget plan. Other states don't do this. So it might seem like hitting your head against a wall to come to regular committees, but that particular appropriation, they are terrible meetings to come if you're looking for interest in and entertainment. But in this case, because of that money that comes from the budget, and I will tell you, just as Victoria was describing the kinds of detail accountability, there is no other area in that committee, and I know others, where that kind of accountability isn't expected and planned before and during and after by the Business, Economic Development and Labor Committee. They want to know all the details, and then they will consider what money is being requested from the state government and make criteria for its being allocated, or even recommended to the Executive Appropriations Committee. So the people on that committee and others that might deal with UEPA topics are ones that I believe can receive these, but then even publicize. And I think we're going to move into more of what we can be doing. But that particular membership in that committee, I think, are really good targets for your questions.
That's a good answer. I think everybody, I don't know, maybe everybody knows that what the lawsuit is that he was referring to, but the city sued the state over violation of the Ripper Clause, which says that the state can't take something that's been, given to a city, like land use planning, they can't take that away from them. And so that's what the lawsuit is alleging, as Victoria referenced. The Supreme Court has heard oral arguments on it. They've taken briefs on it. We've been waiting for a ruling on this for quite some time. I ran into former Mayor Ted Wilson last week, and he was pretty upset, frankly, that it's taken them so long to rule. So we're awaiting a ruling on that, and it could have a major impact on the outcome of this project.
Could I add something to address the questioner's question about what else we might be able to do on the legal front? Members of the coalition have been in several meetings with Region 8 of the EPA. And it turns out that the ability of the EPA to do anything proactive is extremely limited. Most of their capability is about redressing problems that have arisen rather than preventing things that might arise. But there are several other aspects. I briefly mentioned the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which has preemptive control over what are called the waters of the U.S. In order to become a part of the waters of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has to make a determination. And so far, they have not made one as far as the wetlands surrounding the Great Salt Lake on the south end are concerned. The piecemeal development of the area means that each little parcel doesn't rise to the level of scrutiny by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The entire project would. So this is a area where somehow we need to get the Army Corps involved and get them to determine whether these are wetlands as far as the Clean Water Act is concerned, and then they would have the ability to regulate what kind of development is allowed.
Okay, you've got it. Oh, we're going to go here and then back there.
I'll go second.
You'll get next.
Two or three things. The business model sounds really great, and trusting business to have the right motivations for doing things is great. But we're living in Utah where developers make all the decisions about what's going to happen, typically. So it's great to hear that, and it's great to feel that that may be possible, but I have my doubts. The audits. There was a legislative audit on homelessness. There was a legislative audit on our criminal justice system. They both found faults, major faults with the systems. The systems in place to deal with these problems ignored the audits and went about business as normal. So what confidence can we have that the auditors are going to do what they do, and they do a great job? I've talked to the auditors on a number of occasions. They do a great job, they care, and they're committed to doing the right thing. What possibility is that somebody's going to actually listen to what they find? And the third thing is water. Not clean water or dirty water or how we use water. Water itself. The Salt Lake is drying up. Pineview Reservoir was empty last year. Our reservoirs are emptying. We have a water problem that doesn't seem to be discussed in how we plan for the future. It's like we're ignoring the bigger problem to go along with business as normal because we don't want to confront the real problem, which is we're going to have to change how we do business and how we think about the future in order to survive. So if you could comment on any of that, I'd appreciate it.
Who wants to go first?
I think my confidence, not my confidence, I don't have confidence yet. I will have confidence when it's done. My hope is because who's in the room? Representative Schultz and Senator Stevenson both believe in this project. Senator Stevenson carries scars with him because of the U-Star project that was canceled, and he doesn't want to get $250 million down the road and then have to cancel something else. I think their desire to see this project done is what makes us confident that that audit gets attention. Homelessness is an abstract construct that most of people go home to communities and don't deal with at the level that we deal with it here, right? So the failure to adopt those recommendations is a much more abstract concept to them. This is something they want. I'm hoping to leverage that desire into protections for us and responding with integrity to the audit. As for water, I've been in office for 5 months and have become a logistics expert. I have not become a water expert, but I'm very thankful for Laura Briefer at the city. We did put a 200,000 gallon per day cap on any new industry here, and I know that we're being conscientious about it.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Bev Cooper, and I'm so happy you're all there, and I count on Robert Gehrke to make sure the audit gets out. I was fortunately redistricted into a Republican district in Davis County, and I am so excited about driving my new legislator crazy because he claims he's going to represent me. And so I'm wondering, I've been frustrated by what I personally can do and how I can maybe have an impact or where I can have an impact. I'm really action-oriented, and I would really like that kind of information from you all. And again, thank you for being there.
This is a really important question, and it's one that we were going to address at the end, but let's do it now. I think to sort of rephrase it or reframe it, what is the best possible outcome of this, and what can people here who are concerned about this do to try to get this involved and move it in that direction? Let's start down at this end. We'll start with Liz, and you work our way back this way.
So I think of how things impact constituents and how things are perceived by constituents a lot. And the thing that I know is that in a situation like this, we can feel, when we feel hopeless and we feel anxious, we can feel really alone. And I think one of the things that helps that is to get together and know other people. And even one of my thoughts is even form writing groups so that you are together writing individual letters to representatives. And in the case of a representative who might not, or a legislator who might not be on a budget committee that seems to directly deal with environment or business, if your representative happens to be one of those doctors up in Davis County, I don't know which one.
She's got Todd Weiler now, or he's got her.
So, I think finding the topics that they're interested in and drawing the line between that topic and their interests will be effective with them. And if they get letters from numerous individuals that make those connections that aren't necessarily environment, but might be the impact of the environment on the health and the health, the social justice issues. In my district, virtually 90% of West Valley City is in a similar category of They're comfortable, but they are one medical emergency away from catastrophe. And that kind of impact drawn to the attention because of health care or, again, the issues that the legislature is interested in, I think makes a difference. But in terms of actually making it happen with us as individuals, I think if we work together, just find one or two other people, and there are lots of structures in this congregational community, but also in connection with, I mean, all of us know people in our families and friends and neighborhoods that we can inform and help take the steps to help our state legislature know that we're aware, we're watching for that audit. The audit will have a whole page or more of recommendations that can be legislative action. And if they know that we're all aware of that, it makes a difference. And that's one of the reasons, that Mike Schultz and Jerry Stevenson are aware, because they, especially with that U-Star situation, lots and lots of money invested on the behalf of the taxpayers that didn't go where it was supposed to go.
I think the other thing, I view this truly as a cross-cultural competency operating in this space. We didn't strike down segregation in this country because we were stripping humans of dignity. We did it because white business owners were being deprived access to black markets. The language of our country is economic development. Now, you and I can fight to change that and to educate young people so that we move towards the governance that should be based on human dignity. But while this is the truth, we should play the game. We should understand that we are not asking for bleeding heart liberal things that aren't rooted in what's best for all of us, and learn to translate our arguments. I am a brown woman who lives on the Westside who is raising her children without the father in the home. I love social justice. It works in my favor 9 times out of 10. Let that be the moral that you decide at home that guides your work. And when you get there, please bring up the facts. There is so much here that doesn't rely. Friday is evidence. I have my entire life lived as the child of a culture war. And if we turn this into a culture war issue, you have well-armed opponents. If we turn this into fact-based inquiry based on environmental impacts, transparency, and constitutional issues, and those sorts of things, that is objective fight. For me, in order to engage in good faith, I have a view of where this thing goes. I communicated to you, I would like to see us do something like low emissions biomedical manufacturing that provides jobs and sustainability for our neighborhood, and I don't have to create unaffordable housing by raising property taxes. Like, that's my dream, right? So I have my vision of what this thing would have to be and what bars and hurdles we would have to clear in order for me to feel satisfied. And all of my work is oriented around those principles, those kinds of things. But this is emotional. You and I are sending kids to school. We are watching our parents increasingly be unable to breathe this air. We are increasingly not just inconvenienced, but imperiled by this. It is highly emotional. When you interact around this outside of the places like this where your people are gathered, please come with facts. Please don't challenge their morality. There's no quicker way to be sidelined and have your good information disregarded than to come and make this a culture war issue.
David, do you want to take a crack at that?
Well, I second everything that Liz and Victoria have said. Particularly what Victoria just said about avoiding the culture war. Everybody here knows that opposing an economic development project like this, for whatever reason, runs against the cultural grain here in Utah. And we do need to be cognizant of that. Being armed with facts is extremely important, but we unfortunately also know that facts don't always win the day. So as far as what the best possible outcome is, I mean, the operative word is possible, right? And politics define what is possible. So we have to be very canny about how we approach this. More harm was done by those people who went to a UEPA board meeting and got hauled off by the police. More harm was done to this cause by those folks, as well-intentioned as they were, than anything that UWIPA itself or the state legislature has done. So, yes, facts, but also political awareness. Not something that liberals are always very good at. I have to admit, being one myself. But here it's extremely important. And so I would second what Victoria said. And we cannot vilify legislators, we cannot vilify the property owners, because right now they're in the driver's seat. And because of the city agreements, there's nothing anybody can do. If UWIPA vanished tomorrow, it wouldn't change the conditions for development north of I-80 for the vast majority of that land area. So, vilifying Colmena and Kennecott is also going to be counterproductive. We have to, for the best outcome, we need to work with those folks and get them to voluntarily accept that, developing their properties in a more sustainable fashion is in their interests as well as that of the public.
And I'm just going to add to what both of these two have said. I've seen this up at the legislature before, this jujitsu that they do, where if you come at them and you don't have your facts in place, they kind of take a step to the side and your whole argument gets swept aside. You really got to have your data, your facts in place when you're making this case to them. And I also would suggest, if you're not already doing it, keep an eye on what the Center for Biological Diversity is doing on this issue. Dita Seed has been all over this for the last, 5 years now probably. So we've got 2 questions online, and we'll go to those and then we'll kind of wrap up.
Robert, I wanted to insert just one more note, really quick note about strategy. When you know something and you've got the facts, one of the ways to approach a policymaker is to put it in the form of a question. So you ask the question about which you already have the answer and already know quite a bit, and see how that legislator or that other policymaker answers the question, because that helps them receive it, but then they get to be the authority, and then you get to compare what they say and how thoroughly and how caringly they respond to the question. But I've found questions have a lot of power, where scolding, judging, acting like you know what you know doesn't have the same effect. It's an interesting dynamic.
All right. Our online questions?
Yeah, we've got a question here from Laura Davis on Zoom. She asks, how will this potential increase in businesses coming to the area affect housing availability and housing prices? Will it potentially create a scarcity of housing or force housing prices up, resulting in a reduction of affordable housing for lower or middle income people? And she continues, also, will the housing that is affordable to lower and middle income families be in the areas most affected environmentally? And regarding health, where they will be at a greater risk for illness due to a potential poor environment, due to the development of the port project, as happens in other areas of the U.S. where the community water supply, and et cetera, is negatively affected.
Okay. That's a big question. Who wants to take a crack at that?
Well, the area north of I-80 itself is not suitable for residential development, largely because of the insect problem. It's not suitable for commercial development for the same reason. Something we haven't mentioned is the fact that any development north of I-80 will require increased spraying of insecticides, which are known neurotoxins that cause fetal maldevelopment and learning disabilities in children, and for those students who are going to schools near the port. But for me, the housing issue that the port raises is the need to minimize the commuting distance between where people live and where they work. If the port is to become an employment center, we hope, of a sustainable kind, people will need housing as close to that as they possibly can, and or public transportation to get them there, so that we don't see the kind of increase in car traffic that my prediction envisaged.
So 10% of the tax increment is given to the city, and we are developing a community land trust model of affordable housing. My predecessor, James Rogers, was really amazing at advocating for that. This year, the payment is $528,000. Next year, it's projected to raise to $600,000. And as that community grows, an increasing amount of money will be delivered from UEPA to the redevelopment agency. They'll administer it, and we're looking at, we'll be having that. Housing is the perennial issue. But as to some of the other questions, things like affordable housing overlays are going to have to get much more reasonable hearings in this city for us to have a really good faith conversation about that status. I would love it if my district didn't have to be the home to everyone who made, 40% AMI and below, and they could come live, up in the East Benches. I think it would be wonderful, and we know that mixed income development is the best sustainable strategy, but we're going to have to train ourselves as a city to have a much better good faith dialogue. I happen to agree with Dr. Brenda Scheer when she says it doesn't go far enough, but I like to move needles. If there were magic wands to wave, they would have been waved by now, so our job is to move the needles.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we had one more online, and then we were going to, we'll get.
Forget your exercise.
Who's your wife that said that? She's not.
Danette McGilvray asks, the question about water was important, but I did not hear an answer. Are water considerations part of the plan being discussed?
What was that?
Are water considerations part of the plan being discussed?
I think
I'm not aware of a plan that's being discussed.
Yeah, that's kind of
they're being discussed. It's a consideration everywhere. This year at the legislature, if you weren't the Great Salt Lake or water, good luck getting any ARPA dollars. The crisis is here, and it's no longer deniable.
Yeah, water is a topic in every single committee. It relates to everything. But talk can not necessarily result in what we expect or need to see. And that's one of the areas to watch, because one of the patterns that we have seen is a lot of talk, a lot of show of concern, but if the bottom line is only about economics, then as soon as the economic standard is met by this much water or this much water, then that can be the end of the water discussion. And that can't be the end of this water discussion, because it's been developing for over 20 years in the first place.
The city did put the 200,000 gallons per day cap on industry. So that is a statute that we now have as some level of protection.
And we'll do one more, and then we're going to try to wrap it up.
Here, you go.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mikhail. I'm a PhD student up at the University of Utah. Part of my dissertation is looking at air quality and unequal harm to people of color communities, specifically in Salt Lake City. So, looking at our impacts of the port not studied, we have answers for some of these questions from other studies in California for the Port of Los Angeles. Now, these estimates are conservative. The Port of Los Angeles is a port-based system where it has constant air currents coming through. It does not have the bowl that Salt Lake City is currently in. So, with that conservative estimate, they put a 1 mile buffer around the roads that were leading into and out of the port. And they found that within a 1 mile zone, the people that were exposed to the DPM, diesel particulate matter, from those, the engines, the exhausts, they had a higher chance of developing cancers, asthma, learning disabilities from the moms, everything. So then that's a very conservative estimate. And I used that same model here. And there's 396,000 people that are living within a 1 mile buffer of the I-80, the 215 going north and south, and I just did Salt Lake City. So there is a very unequal impact of people that are going to be experiencing the inland ports. And then also I did a population analysis on the populations that are currently there from the 2020 census. We've got 42.46% of the Hispanic population living within that buffer zone. We have 25.9% of the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population, 9.9 Asian, and then we've got 32.9 Native American, 16 Black and African American, 7.2 white, And the total population within that buffer for Salt Lake County is 9.35% of the population. So we can look at which communities are going to be suffering the most. It's going to be the ones that are closest to that road. Cars, trucks, trains, cranes, and other equipment are all diesel particulate matter exhausting machines. So then regardless of how things progress, if this finishes, then the workers are going to be exposed to a lot more DPM. How much? Time's running out. Does everybody know what a diesel particulate matter is? Question. If this finishes, is there any kind of reparations for the people that live closest to it? So I know last year there was a very brief discussion on setting aside money for people that develop lung cancer from living in close proximity to these places. So for the people that are going to be sick and that are going to die from this, is there any kind of funding for them? Because a lot of these families can't pay for lung cancer. I mean, that's how I lost one of my friend's brothers.
Calling it reparations will be the quickest way to make sure it doesn't happen. So 40% of that portion that we're remitting to UEPA is to be used for environmental and community impact mitigation. How that gets stratified has yet to be determined. That seems to me the most likely way for that to happen, and I do know that the city, as we walk through the contract process, is maintaining an eye toward equity and understanding the disproportionate. I mean, we can talk about the non-health impacts of the fact that we have in excess of 200 truck cabs camping on our streets on the west side every night, which presents not only the danger of them idling all night long to maintain their climate control, but then also, how do I know who's in that cab and if my child is safe to play in the yard? The levels of risk endured by the west side in particular to shoulder these sorts of crises are innumerable. And I know the city is trying to be cognizant of how to mitigate those through the use of this increment.
Shauna wanted one quick one, so we're going to give Shauna one. We'll stick around after, but we're trying to.
Yeah, I think this is going to have to be the last question.
I just want to talk in regards to the business model, and I want to focus on the executive director now, who has been voted off the island, and he essentially has a new position with no job description. I want everyone to know his experience in California while at the Los Angeles port. He worked in logistics and in commercial real estate. I think the UEPA board is inept. This is not emotional. For the nearly 5 years that the UEPA board has been in effect, the UEPA website has been built. An output of dollars that has been spent is totally unacceptable. The city could oversee the development of the Northwest Quadrant. I vote to dissolve the UEPA board. It is an exercise in ineptness. And my question is, do we want the UEPA or do we need it?
That's the big one, I guess, right? Is it here to stay? Or
we broke the seal on this area.
Yeah.
The portion north of the airport that's in my district that borders 2100 West and goes all the way out is not under UEPA jurisdiction, and I am meeting once a week with commercial developers who are intending to bring upwards of 1 million square foot of warehouse per project that are all truck-served warehouses. I don't like this. This is not where I want to be. I absolutely think that UEPA and getting them to a state of functionality is a level of protection for us that we require now.
I would add that in the 443 bill that was passed this year, UEPA was given the authority to regulate access to its facilities based on the qualities of the vehicles that are used. They haven't used it yet, but they could, in theory, say to everybody, if you don't have an electric truck, you cannot come here. I don't think they would do that, but something between freewheeling access and such restriction would definitely benefit. Without UEPA, we would be working under the terms of the developer agreements that the city signed with Colmena and Kennecott, which gives the city and therefore the public no voice in what goes on there at all.
I think we're going to call it there. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks. Give him a hand.
Fabulous.
And thank you all for coming. I think everybody's agreed to stick around for a little bit. We can discuss any other questions.
Come on out to the patio. You can take off your mask, enjoy coffee and refreshments, and continue the conversation. Thank you, Robert.